Hi, welcome back to the Power BI Custom Visuals course, and in this module we're going to be looking at the Timeline Storyteller. Now the Timeline Storyteller is developed by Microsoft, and it's a really fascinating visual that, as the name implies, gives you the ability to tell a story within a timeline. So think of a natural timeline of your data. In fact, the example you're seeing on the right is golf professionals. So professional golf players, how well they've done across time. And so what you're seeing is how many times they've been disqualified, how many times they've placed in certain tournaments, how many times they've won tournaments. And you're seeing that across a nice timeline here that can go across multiple years or within a single year. And it visualizes that information for you. And it allows you to actually have multiple representations and multiple layouts of your data. You happen to be looking at the radial representation on the right-hand side of the screenshot here. You can also create multiple scenes, and this is really where the storytelling capability comes into play. You'll see as we do our demonstration here in a few moments that we're going to actually walk you through creating a story. And it can be a little bit boring because I'm having to click and create a new scene and create another scene and create another scene. But basically the idea of scenes here is creating a snapshot view of the visual. It saves what that snapshot looks like, and then you can tie each of those snapshots together into a story. So I can make the visual look a certain way, take a snapshot or a scene, and then change the visual altogether, and then take another scene, and then change it again, and then make another scene, and you can toggle your way through all these scenes that you create within inside of the Timeline Storyteller. You could also add annotations and images, so you can see images of golfers on the right-hand side. You could also add annotations. That's what you're seeing on the far right, where it says in 2016, Dustin Johnson won the US Open. That's an annotation that's been added. So you have the ability to really kind of add in things there to make it easier for you. Where you see in the middle of the screen in red, it says Dustin Johnson wins at Oakmont Country Club. That is actually a field. That's a description field that you have, and you can add in as some descriptive text context here. And so that way, whenever you select or highlight over a certain area of the visual, it pops open that text, almost like a tooltip. So a lot of cool things that we can do with this visual. Let's actually go ahead and work our way through an example. And the example that we're going to be looking at in our scenario is going to be looking at TV ratings. All right, so we're starting from scratch with this one. And again, this is going to be one of a little bit of a longer video because we are going to take our time through going through this visual and showing you what's possible. But our first step is going to be to bring in our data. Okay, that's always our first step. So we're going to go up to the Get Data section, and we're going to select Excel. And the data that I provided to you for this example is going to be called TV ratings. So we'll select TV ratings here and select Open. And the file that we're going to be using for this example is one here called Show Ratings by Year. You can kind of get an idea of what the data looks like. We have each of these are TV programs. Okay, so you see things like Bonanza and Andy Griffith show in here. You can see what the TV network was that produced it. And you can see the beginning and end year that it was the top rated show. So these are the top rated shows for each year. And then there's going to be some shows where it crosses multiple years. So you'll actually see as we scroll down, there'll be some shows that were really top shows for multiple years inside of this data set. We'll get a look at that as we actually use the visual. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and load this into the Power BI desktop. And we're going to get that data brought in. You'll see it in the fields list here in just a few moments as it comes into our data model. And then our next step, now that we have that data in here, is to actually import the visual that we're going to be using. So you'll look up on the top ribbon area here, and you'll see there's the custom visuals section. You can also come over here to where the little ellipses is, and you can click on From Store. And if you click on From Store, this is where you can go search for the visual that we're going to be using. The visual we're using in this case is called Storyteller, or that's the easiest way to find it. And you'll see Timeline Storyteller pop up whenever you search for Storyteller here. Now, there's only one here right now. If you're watching this video later and there's another visual that's been added called Storyteller, then you might see multiple listed here. But at least for the time being, this is the only one that is called Storyteller. So I'll go ahead and hit Add on this. That'll add this visual into our visualizations pane on the kind of middle right of our screen. And then we'll click OK to confirm that we have imported that visual. All right, so let's go ahead and bring that visual into the design surface here, and I'm going to make it take up a little bit more of the screen design surface here, almost the whole thing really. You can go ahead and make it take up the whole thing for you. And we'll start to bring in some of the different fields that it requires inside of the field well here. Now, the first one that it asks for is Facet. Now, Facet is something that's basically like a group by, where you can take any one of the fields that you have and you can group it by a certain value. So we can group by maybe TV network, we can group by the TV program if we wanted to. In this case, we're going to go ahead and do a facet by the TV program. The content text, this is the red text if you remember seeing inside of the screenshot I had in the PowerPoint. This is the red text, and let me show you again here real quickly. This is the red text that you saw, then this part of the screen right here where it says Dustin Johnson wins at Oakmont Country Club. That's what the content text is. So whatever you want to be able to display there. Maybe you want to display the TV program again, or maybe you have some more descriptive text that you want to add in. That's where you would actually pass in what kind of text you want to display there. Now, the start date and end date are kind of self-explanatory. This is the beginning and end date for each of these, in this case, TV programs. And so I would add in the start underneath start date, and I would add in the end underneath the end date. And then that provides the beginning and the end for each of these TV programs. You also have the ability to kind of categorize this. So maybe you wanted to change the values to be different colors based on something, maybe like TV networks. So we can bring in TV networks as a category, and that way it'll actually change the categorical color that's being used for each of these. You can see the legend here displaying and showing each of the TV networks, and of course you can highlight above each of them to be able to see how well they have done. And so what we're looking at least initially here, is a nice timeline. We're seeing a timeline for each of the TV programs that have been the #1 in that particular year, and then we're seeing them all on one single timeline view. Now, you'll notice a couple of these actually show up more than once in a certain year. That's because there was a tie. So, for example, right here, you're seeing a tie between the TV program of Roseanne and then a tie between the Cosby Show for the year, I believe that's 1989. You'll also see for the year 2013, if we come over here on the far right, Sunday Night Football, as well as NCIS, once it pops up there it is, also tied in the year 2013. So you can see where it might show and differ in the way that it displays the data in certain elements. Now, there's not a lot you can do with this as far as the Format Paintbrush here. If you go over to the Format Paintbrush section, there's not a ton here, and that's okay because most of the configuration is done up in the top, on the left, and on the bottom in the middle of the visual itself. But just to highlight what you'll find in the Format Paintbrush section, one is you'll find under the Display section here, you'll find where you can actually increase the size of the UI. So you'll notice that the icons are here kind of small, the text is kind of small, hard to read. You can bump this up a little bit if you wanted to. So I bumped this up to 1, and now you can kind of more easily read what it says as far as the configuration of the tool itself. You can also change the option here called Auto Load. Basically, this has to do with whenever you open up the PBIX file, the Power BI desktop file that has this saved in it, do you want it to automatically go ahead and load up the visual and show you the information, or do you want to have some kind of interaction where you have to do something? This is a pretty intensive, resource-intensive visual, so some cases you might want to leave this turned off so that you actually have to hit a button to get it to generate the data in the visual. But in this case, this is not a ton of data, so I'm going to go ahead and hit auto load, so that way whenever we open up this visual, it'll automatically show the visual as we want to see it. All right, now up in the top section here, let's cover this for a little bit. You'll see there's multiple ways you can represent the data. You'll see timeline representation, you'll see scale, and you'll see layout. The timeline representation, you'll see right now there's only 2 different types of ways we can represent the data. You can see linear and radial right now. And when you choose one of these 2, you'll see that you have the ability to kind of change the way the data is represented inside of the visual. Why are these other ones grayed out though? Well, the reason why these other ones are grayed out is because they can only be used with certain types of scale. You can see when you highlight above this one that this one can only deal with sequential data. And so if you want to use some of these other visuals, you're going to need to modify the scale or the layout to be able to do that. So for example, if I want to look at this calendar view, I'm going to need to have a chronological and segmented section of our data. So it's already set here. You can see a red highlight around chronological. I would have to select this as segmented if I wanted to be able to use the calendar here. So I can select calendar now because I've made it segmented. And so depending on the type of scale and layout that you have, it's going to depend on the way that you can actually visualize and do different representations of your data. So grid, for example, I would need to make some changes for. Curve, I would need to make some changes for. I would need to make some modifications to be able to use some of these other ones. Let's work with segmented here for a little bit, though. I'm going to leave it on segmented, and I'm going to go over here to the linear view on the representation. Okay, so this is what the default view we started with was linear. But remember, if you remember from the very beginning, we started with a unified linear view. And the unified linear view was just basically one single timeline here, but we could change this to a segmented one, which is going to break down our years into decades. And so we can see each of the decades represented here on the vertical axes, and our horizontal axis is showing each individual year within that decade. And this is kind of a more detailed way of being able to look at it, and it's giving us a bigger view of the total timeline by decade. Now, what I'd like to do, and by the way, you can use this legend if you highlight or hover above the legend, you can actually look at certain TV networks and how each of them have done. So that's kind of a nice feature that's kind of built in. But what I'd like to do is I want to highlight certain shows. And so what I'd like to do is, again, we want to build out a story here. We want to build a story that we can work our way through and tell a story about our data. And that's all done through the scene section here on the bottom. In the scene section, you can hit and record a scene. And basically what recording a scene does is it takes a snapshot view of what you're looking at on the visual for this very moment. And so if I were to record a scene right now, it's going to take a scene or a snapshot of the report as it looks right now, or the visual as it looks right now. It takes a few seconds, but after it's done, you'll see the little screenshot here of what the scene looks like. And so we're starting our story with a view of the entire timeline as a linear view that's segmented. But what we can do is we can actually use and leverage the left-hand side to modify this view and create multiple scenes or multiple snapshots of our report. So say, for example, we wanted to filter to anywhere where we see shows that have tied. So I can see here Roseanne and The Cosby Show have tied with each other. And I can see that Sunday Night Football here and NCIS here have tied with each other. And if I want to highlight those, then I can go over the left-hand side and filter. And I can maybe filter just those certain shows. So maybe we start by saying we want to filter in Roseanne or The Cosby Show here. And I want to filter then in Roseanne. I'll hold down Control to do that. And that's going to highlight just those two shows here. And I should tell you here that you can actually change the way filters are done. You can see right now a filter would emphasize this certain selection. So it's actually emphasizing this while still showing the rest of the data in the background. You can also select hide, which means it's going to hide everything else and only show the values that you've selected. Okay, I'm going to choose to stick with the emphasize option, okay, which just highlights the certain section that we have selected. And then I want to do something else. I want to add in an annotation where we actually describe what we're trying to show the users. Again, this is a story, so we want to try and tell them what we're trying to highlight here. And so I would select the annotation, and I would write a little annotation here that says Roseanne and The Cosby Show tie in 1989. Okay? All right, so once I have that, I can hit OK, or hit the check box here. And I've got this in here. I can slide this a little bit further down. You can resize the text box, by the way, by selecting the double arrows, and you can resize it however you want. You can also select the values. If I were to click on Roseanne here and click on Cosby Show, you'll see these little context text boxes showing up here as well. But then our annotation is really telling the story. It's telling us what we want to tell our users. And then we would hit that we want to create a scene or a snapshot here to be able to make it a view that we can toggle back and forth between. So I hit the create a scene. You can see a new scene has been created. And then we can, if we wanted to, we can clear all that we just did. We can clear out the annotations. We can clear out the selections. And we can select another one. So we can hit clear here. And then we can go back to filter. And let's say this time we want to highlight a different show. We want to highlight NCIS. And we want to highlight Sunday Night Football, where we have another tie down here in the bottom. And I can add another annotation here. Annotation, here we go. And then for this one, let's say NCIS and Sunday Night Football tie in 2013. Hit the check mark. That's going to add that to our visual. I can increase the size of that again. And if I wanted to, we could also select those values here so that they actually display for our users. Now you can also, you'll notice that some of this is showing below our little scene creation here. I'll go ahead and create our scene for this one. I'm going to click the button real quickly. But if some of these things get in the way and it's difficult to actually see what you've done, you can click this little button right here, this kind of hollowed out dot. And if you click on that, all of the editor features kind of hide for a moment and you can actually see what you're looking at. And you can still toggle back and forth between the different scenes that you created. So we can go back to scene 1. So here's our opening scene. We can go to scene 2, which is where we highlighted The Cosby Show and Roseanne. And it'll take a second and it'll display our annotation that we added. So give it a few seconds and it'll come up. Seems to take a few seconds the first time you do it. There you go. And then we can hit next scene again and we can see the Sunday Night Football NCIS selection as well. Then if we want to go back to editing, we can click on the same button again to go back to editing and we can work on a new scene. So this time what I'd like to do is I want to clear what we've done here. So I'm going to clear the selection and clear the annotation. And I'm going to clear the filter as well. I'm going to tell it that we want to show all values here. And then what I'd like to do this time is I want to change the type of visual that we're using. So this time what I'd like to do is I want to see a radial view. So we'll select radial. Okay, and you can see by default, looking at radial, it's going to try and do this by what it's faceted by. So because we're looking at a segmented view, we're seeing multiple decades. So each decade is represented here on a radial view. But what I really want to see is I just want to see one single radial view here and be able to see the representation for our entire timeline. So I'm going to switch this over to unified, and we should see one radial view. There we go. With all of our values displayed. On our single value here with our legend, again, you can still use the legend to highlight certain areas, so that functionality is still there. But we're looking at a timeline here that we can now create more storytelling mechanisms behind. So for example, maybe what I want to do is I want to be able to tell a story with what's going on with this radial view. So I would add another annotation here, and let's say something like, let's look at some of the TV programs that have been the top rated for the longest number of years. Okay, I'll hit OK on that. This gives us another annotation that we can maybe put in the middle here. Okay, and then what I can do is I'll make a scene out of that by clicking the little scene button here. So it's going to create our fourth scene is just going to be a view of the timeline with our description. And then what we'll do is we'll highlight certain areas where we have the longest running shows that we want to highlight. And then maybe we'll add in some images and some annotations around with those images as well. So let's walk through how we can do that. So I'm going to clear out this annotation that we did just a moment ago by hitting the clear button. Then I'm going to highlight or select the I Love Lucy show this time. Okay. And then you can see here, it looks like it had a little bit of a long run. So I'm going to add an annotation here and say that I Love Lucy was the top rated show for 3 years. I'll hit the check mark on that, put that aside here so we know we tell the users what we're trying to tell them about it. And then I'm even going to add an image this time. So you can see that you have the ability to add an image right here. And it can be an image URL, or you can actually choose an image from your desktop and it'll embed it here. And so I'm going to go find an image I have saved of I Love Lucy right here. And it'll add that image in once I hit OK. And then I can kind of nicely drag it into our middle area here and resize it so it's not covering anything up, like so. So we've created this nice little visual. You can see we've highlighted I Love Lucy, we added an annotation, we added an image. I would create a scene out of this, and it's going to create this new scene where we're highlighting I Love Lucy, and we're telling our users what we want to tell them about I Love Lucy, that it was a top-rated show for 3 years in a row. All right, so we've got that. Let's now clear this out. Takes us back to where we were in the beginning. And then this time what I want to highlight is, let's go down here. You can scroll down a little bit. Let's find the Cosby Show. So I'll select the Cosby Show here, and I'll add in an annotation again. And I'll say the Cosby Show was the top-rated show for 5 years straight. Hit OK. I have this new annotation I can bring down here. I can add an image again if I wanted to. So let's go find an image I have of the Cosby Show right here. Was a great show at the time, despite Bill Cosby getting himself in quite a bit of trouble. Not really something to laugh about, but he got himself into some bad trouble. But I now have another step here within this that's kind of really telling a story about my data. All right, let's do another scene. Let's click create scene here, or record scene. It's now going to place this as another scene inside of our timeline. And then we'll create one more scene to kind of finalize the story that we've told here. All right, so we'll clear this out one more time. We'll this time select American Idol. That'll be our last one. I'll add in an annotation. So our annotation this time will be American Idol was the top rated show for 6 years straight. Okay. I'll hit checkbox on that to get that annotation added in, bring that down here near the data, and then we'll add in an image of American Idol. There we go. And I'll hit OK. All right, so that was the third time we did that. I did it a little bit faster that time because that was, like I said, the third time we've done it. I'll resize this to fit within inside of the timeline view here a little bit better. There we go. And then we have it. That's it. So we've now created the story, and the way we can really test this out and show users how to use it is we can collapse all the editing features. So we'll collapse all the features to edit it. I'll scroll back up a little bit, and we'll kind of toggle our way through the different scenes. So you'll see on the bottom left here, you have the little arrows that you can select. And so this is going to start us on scene 1. We're looking at scene 1 right now. And you can see it tells you, if you click on the arrow, it's going to take you to scene 2. So I can click on scene 2. Right now, this is just showing us a full view of our segmented linear view of our data. And if I click on scene 2, it's going to highlight the Roseanne and the Cosby Show here, and it's going to tell us that there was a tie in 1989. Again, remember, whenever we did this previously, it takes a little time the first time you do it. There it goes. And then you can click on the next scene again. It'll show us this time NCIS and Sunday Night Football tied in 2013. We can click on it again. This is going to take us to our radial view where we're describing what we're trying to tell our users here. So you can see we have a unified radial view where we're trying to say, let's look at the TV programs that have the top-rated that should be TV programs, top-rated TV programs for the longest number of years. Hit next. We can see I Love Lucy was top-rated for 3 years. Click next. We can see The Cosby Show was top-rated for 5 years. Click next. We can see that, oh, did I not create a scene for that last one? Oh, I must have missed a scene on that last one here. Let's double-check that, because I think I am supposed to have 7 scenes. Let me refix that one, no problem. We'll come back down here on the bottom. We'll select the last scene, and I'll clear it out. I must have not hit the snapshot or the create scene on the last one. So the last one that we were looking at was American Idol. We'll go ahead and select American Idol one more time. Simple mistake, but easy to fix. I'll resize that in here. We'll select American Idol, and then we'll add our annotation in here. That would be this option right here. And we said American Idol was the top-rated show for 6 straight years. All right, so we'll hit OK on that and bring that down here. There we go. So we've got that fixed. Now the key part, again, this is a simple mistake you can make as well. Make sure you hit record scene so that it actually saves that scene or snapshot view of the visual into the scene editor down here in the bottom. So there it is. Now we can see as we go through our timeline, I'll click the collapse of the editor again. We should be able to toggle our way through each one of these, no problem now. I'll do it a little bit quicker this time without telling the whole story along with it because I already did that one time. But we can kind of see it highlighting the certain years that tied. We can see it highlighting the next set of years that tied, going more to the radial view this time, and getting our storytelling description here in the middle, which will show up here eventually. There it is. Then we'll see we highlight I Love Lucy, we highlight then The Cosby Show, and then now we highlight American Idol. So has this nice capability built in. This does all work from the Power BI service. Once I go to deploy this, all this interaction does work. Now, one thing I did notice when I deployed the Power BI service is some of the images that I had got automatically resized a little funky, so that's one thing to be aware of, that you may have some issues with the images once you deploy. But other than that, I think I've really liked this visual. It's been a really interesting one to work with, and I think you will like it as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this custom visual as well, and look forward to showing you our next one in our next module. Thanks a lot.